You have to understand something before any of this will make sense, if it ever can. Truth isn't clean. It doesn't arrive in daylight with trumpets and relief. It doesn't heal. The kind of truth we are dealing with here doesn't even knock on the door. It kicks it down, walks in without removing its boots, and sits at the table with the smell of fire and rot still clinging to its coat. I'm telling you now because once this begins, there's no going back to the version of the world you knew before. Whatever innocence you carried about faith, about children, about small-town decency, it won't survive this. The journals were found sealed in wax under a collapsed floorboard of the old Pine Hollow Church during a state-funded renovation effort in 1987. The pages, bound in cracked leather and brittle as dry leaves, belonged to Pastor William Phillips, who served the congregation from 1834 to 1841, before vanishing during a snowstorm so fierce it buried the eastern ridgeline for nearly a week. Local folklore claimed he'd been taken by God, or wolves, or madness. What was never claimed, what no one in town dared suggest, was that Pastor Phillips had uncovered something too real to live with, something that could not be confessed, only endured. That journal told a story that unstitched the entire moral fabric of Pine Hollow and left behind only questions too dangerous to ask aloud. It begins with the Morrison twins. Rebecca and Rachel Morrison were 9 years old when their father, itinerant preacher Ezekiel Morrison, arrived with them in Pine Hollow on the third Sunday of October, 1834. They were not beautiful children. That needs to be said plainly. Their faces were unremarkable, pale and soft-featured, like any child born into hunger and travel. But their eyes, God help us, their eyes were something else entirely. Not bright, not dull, not clever or blank. Their eyes did not watch the world. They read it. Like scripture, like memory. They spoke softly and not often, rarely apart, and never in jest. Rachel was the quieter of the two, often looking to her sister before speaking. Rebecca, for all. Her stillness had a way of stepping into a moment as though she had already lived it. She would glance at a tree stump and tell you who sat on it in the year 1823. She would pass by a weeping woman on her porch and whisper the name of a stillborn child never spoken of aloud. These weren't guesses. These weren't parlor tricks. These were statements of fact-precise, uncanny, and emotionally surgical. At first, the town believed what all towns believe when something unnatural arrives with a preacher, that it was divine, that it was a miracle, that these girls had been touched by God and brought here for revival. But God, if he was involved at all, had not come to comfort. The first account of what they could do came on their third day in Pine Hollow. Mrs. Evelyn Whitlow, who had just turned 70 and spent her days tending to roses that hadn't bloomed properly since her husband's death, was startled when Rebecca stopped on the road in front of her garden and tilted her head. "Your roses died the first time in 1829, Rebecca said. Not from drought. There was a white fungus beneath the soil. Your son Timothy put in cow's milk, but it was already too late." Mrs. Whitlow's face drained of color. Timothy had died 5 years earlier in the coal fire that took the miller's barn. No one living had seen the note he'd left about trying to save the roses for his mother. The jar of cow's milk was buried under the porch. They dug it up that night. It only got worse. Rebecca did not explain how she knew. Rachel would only say she had seen it too, in a dream, but said dream like it meant something else entirely. Not a vision, not a prophecy, a return. As though they were not seeing things that would happen, but things that had already happened and had been forgotten by everyone but them. Then came the church floorboard incident. Pastor Phillips had been tending to maintenance repairs at the back of the sanctuary when the twins walked in silently behind him. He described it as a presence like a winter breeze that had no business. coming through sealed doors. Rebecca pointed to the third plank from the wall and said, "That's where the bottle is. The whiskey your wife left you when the baby died. It's wrapped in the blanket from the crib. The blue one, but it was white before she dyed it because she couldn't bear to see it." Phillips froze. The death of his infant son had never been spoken of publicly. His wife, gone now 2 years from fever, had never admitted to him that she'd hidden a bottle of whiskey in the church. He pulled the board free and found it exactly as described. He didn't touch the blanket. He couldn't. He later wrote in his journal that he didn't believe that girls were evil. Not then. He said he believed they were windows, not doors. That? Something looked through them, not the other way around. Something that had never forgotten a single moment that had ever passed in Pine Hollow. Something that could not die because it had never been born. He said Rebecca's voice reminded him of still water before a drowning. After that, people began locking their doors during the day. It made no sense, of course. These were children. Pale, quiet, devout. But people started to understand something. Unspoken, that there is a kind of knowledge that stains. That you can carry something invisible just by hearing it, just by standing too close to it. Rebecca and Rachel became figures of dread, not malice. No one thought they meant harm. But harm was not the point. It was the burden. You could see it in the way Phillips changed, on the way he began to avoid mirrors, in the way his hands shook when he opened his Bible and paused over passages that once brought comfort, but now read like veiled threats. The girls had begun telling truths to people who weren't asking questions, not just historical facts, but personal devastations. A man cheating on his wife. A young woman burying the child she bore out of wedlock in the woods behind her father's orchard. A missing brooch found at a well behind the Silas homestead, identified with perfect accuracy down to the scratch on the clasp. These were truths no one wanted. They came without mercy, without context, without preparation, just placed in your lap like a dead bird. What makes this different, what separates this story from ghost tales and folklore, is how thoroughly every word from those girls was verified. Phillips, obsessed and unraveling, began following up on every claim. He found physical evidence, spoken confessions, historical records. He wrote it all down, not because he believed it would be useful, but because he hoped that if he committed it to paper, the burden would leave him. It did not. He once wrote, "Truth is not the enemy of lies, but of comfort, the enemy of forgetfulness. Truth is the devourer of sleep." And then, on the fourth Sunday, the girls entered the church barefoot. Not dirty, not bleeding, just ... barefoot. They sat in the front pew. Pastor Phillips said it was the quietest congregation he'd ever heard. No babies cried. No floorboards creaked. Even the candles burned lower, as if the room itself had grown heavier. The girls waited until the sermon ended. Then Rebecca stood. They told the story of the Whitman family. They said the fire never took them. They said the house burned a full week after the family had already disappeared. They said the twins' faith and hope had died in the church, beneath the pulpit, beneath the very floor they now sat upon. They described the girls' final moments in such unbearable detail that men left the room sobbing, that women fainted. They named who had been there. They named who held the knife. They named who locked the doors. Rebecca spoke while Rachel wept, not like a child, but like a witness forced to relive a crime she could not prevent. Afterward, no one denied it. They couldn't, because too many remembered blood on the old wood, scrubbed hastily by hands that never forgot the way it stuck to their palms. Because too many heard names that hadn't been spoken in 40 years, but were now rising like smoke from graves no one ever dug. Because the exact location of the murdered girls was beneath the foundation stone, laid by Elder Thompson himself, who had not aged a day in the 30 years since. This is what forbidden knowledge does. It unearths. It rots what was preserved. It lights fires in the halls we built to stay warm. And it does not ask your permission. Phillips did not sleep for 6 days after that service. When he finally did, he dreamt of the girls standing at the edge of the churchyard, pointing to where the earth was hollow. He never finished the journal. The last page is blank, but smudged with what appears to be blood. They found his coat beside the river, his footprints ending at the edge of the frozen water, but no sign of a fall. Just nothing, like he had been lifted, or taken, or erased. This is not a story about magic. This is not a story about angels or devils. This is a story about what happens when the truth returns to a place that thought it had buried it. When innocence comes wearing a child's face and asks questions no one wants to answer. This is about what you carry when you hear something you were never meant to hear. What changes in you, what you cannot unsee. This is about knowledge, the kind that bends the world. The kind that leaves no one innocent, not even the ones who only listened. The morning after the revelation, Rachel delivered in the sanctuary. The town did not speak of it as expected. There were no whispered rumors, no long glances, no communal reckoning instead. There was a strange hush, a silence that felt heavier than the words spoken the night before the congregation gathered for their usual Sunday service, though fewer in number, and Pastor Phillips stood at the pulpit, his voice slightly hoarse, his eyes rimmed with a lack of sleep. He did not reference the night before he preached of silence in the face of suffering, of Job's trials, of how sometimes God asks his children to carry burdens too great for explanation. Rebecca and Rachel sat in the second pew, their faces blank, their hands clasped tightly together. Not once did they look toward the pulpit, only at the wooden floor beneath them. When the service ended, they remained seated until everyone else left. Phillips finally approached them. The older twin, Rachel, spoke before he could open his mouth. "It's under the stone, beneath your feet, Pastor." He froze, his gaze dropping to the floor. He asked them nothing else, just walked slowly back to the pulpit, knelt, and pressed his palms to the large foundation stone that had held the structure for nearly 80 years. It was smooth, flat, darker than the others around it. He had never given it a second thought until now. Something cold seemed to radiate from it, as though it was holding in breath. Later that night, when the church was empty and the lamps were out, Phillips returned with a pry bar and a lantern, his hands shaking as he wedged the iron beneath the edge of the stone. It took him over an hour of quiet labor to loosen it, and when he finally lifted it, there was no crypt, no tunnel, just a shallow cavity, and in it a box, no bigger than a shoebox, made of iron and wrapped in rotted linen. Inside the box were 3 items: a silver crucifix with one arm broken, a small cloth doll soaked with a dark rust-colored stain, and a letter scrawled in jagged, faded ink. It was not signed. It had no date, but the words were unmistakable in there. Urgency and terror. We were wrong. We were all wrong. He was no man of God. We buried what we could. We swore to protect the town. We called it holy, but it was never holy. It was his. The devil does not need horns, only a voice, only trust. Phillips recoiled, the lantern light flickering wildly. The box seemed to pulse with heat. Then with cold, he closed it, quickly replaced the stone, and sat in the darkness for hours, unable to move, unable to pray. The next day, he sealed the pulpit with nails and warned the congregation that repairs were underway, that no one should enter without his say. So but the twins, they knew. They returned to the church each evening, not with questions, but with purpose. Rachel would walk the aisles whispering. To the empty pews, Rebecca would sit by the altar, her eyes closed, murmuring things no one could quite hear sometimes. They wept, but never for themselves. Dr. Halleck had begun to keep close notes ever since the incident on the stairs. He noticed things: the girls' body temperatures were consistently lower than normal, their heart rates Unchanging even under stress, their pupils dilated in the dark, but did not contract with light, and worst of all, their blood was the color of old wine, thick, slow, and clinging to the sides of the vial. He brought these findings to Pastor Phillips, who demanded silence, threatened excommunication. Halleck ignored him and went instead to the town's archives. He began looking into the church's foundation records, who built it, when, and why there were. Names he recognized, old family names, but there was one signature that stood alone at the bottom of the page. Scrawled in red ink, Samuel Haddon. Haddon was not a name the town remembered, not in stories, not in headstones, not in public records, but Halleck found him in a single newspaper, clipping from 1841, a traveling preacher who vanished after allegations of possession and child sacrifice. Swept through a Missouri township, the article claimed. He was never found, and his followers fled, scattered across the frontier. But the portrait accompanying the article was unmistakable, the eyes sunken, the smile curved unnaturally wide, the same face now engraved above. The arch of the Pine Hollow Church, though the engraving bore another name, Reverend Elijah Barrett, founder visionary saint. When Halleck showed this to Phillips, the pastor turned white and whispered, "He was my great-grandfather." The truth began to drip slowly like blood from a hidden wound. Barrett was not his real name. Haddon had come to Pine Hollow under a new identity. With gold and silver and a dream of a sanctuary for the broken, the lost, and the damned he brought within rituals. He called healing prayers and sermons that lasted 3 days and bled the soul of sin, but the children of that era, they vanished, or died young, or were never born. The twins' connection to him was uncertain, but something in their blood, something in their eyes, hinted at proximity, perhaps not of relation, but of memory. They knew the chants, though. They'd never heard them. They recognized the language, though. It had no place in Scripture. They said his name in sleep. Haddon. Each time they said it, the wind outside the church would howl like wolves circling a fire, and the floorboards would creak as if old footsteps were retracing their steps back to the altar, back to the stone, back to the box. One night Rebecca stood in the sanctuary alone and called out, "I remember the cellar, I remember the fire, I remember the stone knife, the congregation's blood." He wanted more than worship. He wanted obedience. He wanted pain. Rachel followed her into the light and whispered, "We are not the first, we are just the last." Phillips, listening from the shadows, dropped his candle and fled. He would not return to the church again. And still the twins came every night, speaking to the walls, to the spirits that walked behind them, to the names no one else remembered. But something had shifted. The whispers were louder, now the shadows longer, and in the bell tower a rope long, unused, swayed on windless nights, as if waiting for a neck to receive its judgment. What did he bury under this town, and why did it wake now? What is remembered through children, not yet corrupted by silence? What returns when the dead are not buried in truth? And why do the twins not sleep anymore? Why do they only stare at night, and listen, and wait, and whisper? The plot of land on the western edge of Pine Hollow had always been avoided by instinct rather than rule. There was no fence, no warning, no curse ever spoken aloud, and yet no child played near it, no farmer planted near it, no man built upon it. The grass there grew tall and sickly yellow, even in spring, and dogs would whimper when dragged past it. The twins began to visit that patch of land. Every evening after leaving the church, they never explained why, they never invited company. They only walked slowly in circles, whispering prayers in no known tongue, and scattering ash from small paper bags carried in silence. Dr. Halleck followed them, once his journal tucked beneath his arm, his shoes silent on the dirt. He watched from a distance, and what he saw unsettled him more than any wound or illness or unnatural blood. The twins did not walk like children. They moved like shadows, mapping something unseen, measuring angles between crooked trees and half-buried stones, and every few steps they would kneel and pressed their ears to the ground, as if listening for something deeper than soil. He returned the next day with a ground-penetrating sensor borrowed from the university in the next county. He told no one, not even his wife, when he scanned the ground. Where the twins had walked, the readings were unclear, inconsistent patches of stone in voids and strange symmetrical lines that suggested not a foundation, but something older. Beneath it, something massive and curved, and hollow like ribs. Later that night, Halleck drank heavily and tried to forget, but dreams came and with them sounds, low groaning voices like wet wood snapping open, and eyes not human, nor animal, but cold, and exact and ancient, watching from beneath the roots. The next Sunday, Rachel approached the altar alone. Rebecca did not come that morning. Her absence was felt in the strange weight of the room, in the way the congregation sat, stiffly, hands twitching, eyes darting to the pulpit and back again. Rachel carried something in her hands, a small wooden box carved with symbols that did not belong to any known alphabet. She set it on the altar and said softly, "This is what he fed them with." When Phillips dared open it, he found nothing inside, no object, no bone, no relic, only a smell like scorched wool and salt, and something wet and black that left a smear on the wooden lining but vanished within seconds. No one spoke the rest of the service, and afterward the congregation left in complete silence. Not even the children cried. That night Rebecca returned, but not as she had been. Her face was drawn, her skin pale, and under her eyes the veins throbbed a dark blue. When Halleck examined her, she did not flinch, but held his gaze, and whispered, "I saw them. I followed the roots down where it is warm and wet, and they showed me what he did. They showed me what we are." He asked her who she meant, and she smiled the way a corpse might remember the shape of joy. She said, "The buried, the bound, the beloved." In the weeks that followed, Moore began to hear things at night, distant wailing behind walls, knocks beneath floorboards, names whispered from empty rooms, firewood split without axes, windows fogged from the inside, despite no breath to cause it. The church's organ played 3 notes each dawn before the sun rose, and the wind stopped moving altogether near the unbuilt house. Phillips tried to reach out to the bishop in the city. He sent letters, desperate ramblings, filled with scripture and confession and riddles, but the post never arrived. No one came, no reply ever returned. He even tried to drive, but the road out of Pine Hollow curved strangely, now always leading back to the old cemetery near the church, and by the 3rd attempt, his tires shredded themselves on gravel that had never been there before. The town was closing inward, breathing slowly, choking on its own breath. The storekeepers found mold growing on sealed cans. The water from the well turned cloudy and then clear again, but tasted of iron and smoke. Children cried without cause at night and slept with their eyes half open, murmuring names of long-dead ministers. The school closed after a child tried to climb the bell tower and leapt before anyone could stop him, leaving no body, only a dark stain and a shriek, still echoing in the rafters. And always the twins walked the land, watched the church, whispered to the stones and the trees and the roots. They began to dress in white burlap robes stitched with black thread that frayed at the edges. Their eyes dulled, their voices deeper and slower, as though pulling language from some pit in the earth. And when asked who they spoke to, they said, "Only him." Hadden. The unbuilt house was not a house, but a mouth, something dug or born or conjured, and then buried, not to forget, but to ferment. And now it was awakened by voices that remembered the old shape of worship, the old shape of pain, the old shape of sacrifice. Halleck tried one last time to cut deeper into the earth on the cursed land, to see what lay beneath, but his tools broke the drill, overheated. The soil steamed, and when he returned the next morning, the hole he'd dug had closed itself perfectly. Not even a seam remained. He went to the church and begged the girls to leave, to run, to flee, to burn it all down. But they only looked at him and said, "He will come whether we invite him or not. This is not about belief. It is about memory and memory never forgets. That night, the sky over Pine Hollow turned a shade of red no one had seen before, not in sun, nor flame, nor blood, and thunder cracked, without lightning, and the trees leaned all in one direction, toward the unbuilt house. And beneath the ground, something shifted, something vast and wet and eager. And still the twins stood in the field, hands raised, eyes wide, mouths open, singing songs never written and never meant to be heard by any living thing. What is waiting? In the earth beneath forgotten land. What was buried not to protect, but to feed? What voices do children hear when silence finally answers? And why do the roots now whisper the name of every soul in Pine Hollow? As if preparing a list, as if taking attendance, as if ready to begin again. The morning after the sky turned red, the town of Pine Hollow awoke to silence. Not ordinary silence, not the kind that comes from still air or absence of birds, but a dense, unnatural quiet that pressed against the skin like humidity and tasted of soil and stone. It was not absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, something beneath hearing, something that pulsed. Every clock in town stopped at 3:33 a meter, and when old Mr. Bensley tried to wind the tower bell at the courthouse, he found his hands bleeding, the mechanism rusted shut, and a name scratched into the brass, casing over and over Rebecca. The twins did not come home that night, and their mother sat unmoving on her porch, staring at the horizon where the unbuilt house lay, her eyes swollen and dry, her hands clenched around a rosary that had broken days before the beads scattered across the floor like teeth. Reverend Phillips called an emergency service at noon. The church half full, the air heavy with incense and dread. People sat stiffly, mouths closed, eyes darting toward the altar, where the wooden box now rested open again, still empty, still stinking. Of salt and wool and something darker, they waited for answers. They waited for comfort. But when Phillips opened his mouth, what came out was not scripture. He said the land remembers. He said the first communion was not with bread and wine, but with ashen blood and bone. He said the earth took what was given, and in return it gave us the illusion of mercy. He began to bleed from the nose and ears, but did not stop speaking. His hands trembled, but his voice grew louder. He said the founding of Pine Hollow was not by chance. He said the church was not built on faith, but on obligation. He said the town was the debt, and the children were the interest, and the time had come to pay. Several people fled screaming, others sat paralyzed. Some dropped to their knees, not in prayer, but in confusion, in surrender, in some ancient instinct that whispered submission before understanding. That night, the twins were seen again in the field, but this time they were not alone. 12 figures stood with them, robed in white burlap, their faces obscured, but their movements precise. Each held a stone bowl, each poured something dark into the soil and whispered as they did. The wind circled the field, but never entered the grass, bending backward away from the ritual. Dr. Halleck tried to intervene. He shouted for the girls. He shouted for anyone to stop it, but as he stepped into the field, his knees buckled, his hands went numb, and he saw them. Again, the ribs beneath the earth, but now they were moving, flexing, contracting, the land itself breathing. He crawled away, retching blood and dirt, and something small and white that crumbled when touched like old eggshells or dried cartilage. The next morning, 6 families were gone, their homes empty, no signs of struggle, but everything left behind: meals half-eaten, lights on, water running, Bibles open to pages torn out, names circled in red. And in every house, a single object sat in the center of the floor, a small stone bowl filled with a dark liquid that never dried, never spilled, never reflected light. Reverend Phillips vanished the same day. His journal was found in the baptismal font, soaked through with blood. Not his body ever found, only the final entry written in smeared Latin, followed by 3 symbols carved into the last page: a spiral, a root, and an eye. The town began to change, not visibly at first, but subtly the air, heavier the shadows, the longer people spoke slower. Blinked less children stopped, playing all together, choosing instead to sit at windows and stare at the church or the field or sometimes nothing at all. The land behind the unbuilt house began to sink slowly, imperceptibly, but it sank enough that the trees tilted toward it, their roots. Exposed like reaching fingers, the animals left entirely. No birds, no dogs, no flies, even the worms. Surfaced and died in the sun. And the dreams returned worse than before, shared by many identical in detail faces, pressing against the inside of mirrors, speaking in reversed whispers, reflections that lingered after the body had moved away, teeth, where there should be none, doors opening inward into nothing but breath. And the twins spoke again, not to people, but to the sky each morning at dawn. They stood facing east, arms raised, mouths open, soundless but synchronized, as if answering a question no one else could. Here. Then the digging began. Not by machines, not by people, but by the earth itself, the ground opening in the fields slowly over days, revealing not tunnels, but rooms, buried chambers made of the same. Red stone as the church altar, slick with moisture, echoing with voices not in words, but in weeping. Inside the first chamber they found bones too many to count, some human, some not, all arranged in circles, all facing inward toward a central pit filled with stagnant water, and something beneath the surface that moved without ripples, without light. The mayor tried to seal it with explosives brought from the next town, but every charge failed to detonate wires. Melted fuses blackened, and when one worker tried to ignite it manually, his eyes turned black, and he whispered a name before collapsing. Dead, his mouth full of white ash. The name was Haddon. The old records burned themselves. The library caught fire from within, though untouched by flame. The books blackened from the spine outward. The church bell cracked in two. The cross above the altar melted into the shape of a spiral. The children began to hum at night, in their sleep, a tune no one could name, but everyone feared. And still the bowls remained full, never spilling, never empty, always waiting. The land did not take back what it wanted. All at once it waited, measured, remembered, and chose. And with each night, another door opened, another chamber revealed, another whisper heard beneath the floorboards of homes built on old promises. The question returned again and again to those still awake, still sane. What was Pine Hollow built to contain? And why does the soil still sing when no one speaks? And why do the twins no longer blink? And why does the field grow taller each morning? Even when cut, even when burned, when salted. Why does it still grow? What is it feeding? And who is coming back to finish what was never allowed to begin? And how many names are left to call before the communion is complete? The doors of the church stayed locked not by key or command, but by force. No hinges rusted, no locks jammed, yet none who touched them could push them open. Their arms would shake. Their breath would slow, their skin would chill, as if something on the other side exhaled against their bones. A cold, not of air, but of memory. Reverend Phillips was gone, but his sermons remained, not written, not spoken, but felt in the marrow of those who heard him that final day. Every child in Pine Hollow stopped speaking for 7 days, not a word, not a sound, not even in sleep. They sat in rooms without moving. They watched corners, not windows. They blinked only once every 5 seconds, and they responded to nothing, except the whisper of their names, which they only heard when no one was near them. Parents wept, prayed, beat their chests, tore pages from Bibles. Some tried to leave, but the roads cracked, the tires ruptured, the birds circled above their cars, screaming with human voices until they turned back. Some who didn't return at all were later found with mouths sewn shut by some coarse thread of human hair, and teeth lodged beneath their eyelids. In the field, the sinkhole grew. It was no longer a hole, but a throat lined with black roots that twitched when watched. A perimeter formed, not marked by fence or stone, but by pressure those who crossed it fell silent, mid-sentence as if swallowed by a mouth, wider than the sky and deeper than light. One girl named Clara began drawing again after 6 days of silence. She used no paper, only her arms, her legs, her walls, her floor with charcoal and chalk. And sometimes, blood, she drew shapes, not symbols, not letters, but loops and folds like intestines, or vons or roots in her drawings. People had no eyes, only mouths. Their heads split at the top to reveal more teeth, and in every corner of every drawing, the twins appeared never smiling, never moving their arms, raised toward a pulsing black orb in the sky. Dr. Halleck examined her, but when he touched her wrist to check her pulse, he froze and whispered 3 words over and over. They see me. They see me. They see me. He would not speak again, and 1 week later his lungs collapsed without injury, as if something had sucked the breath from his body while he slept. The journal of Reverend Phillips was recovered not from the font as before, but buried behind the altar, beneath bricks that had never been laid. Each page now marked with stains of milk and rust, the handwriting no longer his, but childlike, misspelled. Yet deliberate, it spoke of flesh, not his body, but as language. It said blood was a scripture. It said the skin was a veil. It said, the Lord did not abandon us, but returned as soil, as hunger, as consequence. The dreams deepened townspeople, began to remember things they had never known, names. They never heard songs. They had never sung, but could now hum in unison, as if taught in infancy by someone who had never dyed their teeth, began to ache their nails. Curled their skin grew pale and tight, as though something inside was stretching toward the surface. One boy, Jonah, awoke with numbers carved into his chest, not scratched, not cut, but raised like birthmarks, 4 numbers. Only 1632, no one knew what they meant until the historian from the county arrived and confirmed the founding charter of the first settlement, now erased from official maps, bore that exact year, and that settlement was known only as Haddon. The twins were seen again, this time inside the church. Even though no one had opened the doors, they stood before the altar, hands covered in soil. Eyes pitch black and unblinking, they sang, but no sound came out, and as they sang the wooden floorboards curled and snapped, and the crucifix above the altar split along the figures, rib cage revealing something inside, not wood, not paint, but muscle. No one could explain it. The blood from the statue dripped for 7 days, and on the 7th day it turned white and thick like milk, and every child in town awoke with red eyes and dry mouths, whispering a word no adult could understand, but every animal heard and ran, and never returned. In the fields new roots began to grow overnight, long and white, and pulsing with heat. They wrapped around ankles, pulled shoes from feet left. Bruises in the shape of hands when touched, and those who tried to cut them found there. Blades dulled their hands, burned their memories, stolen for minutes at a time. Men forgot their names. Women forgot their children. Lovers forgot each other. Only the children remembered, and what they remembered was not taught in books or sung in hymns. It was older, deeper, crueler. Clara disappeared on the 3rd week only. Her fingernails left behind lined neatly on her pillow, a drawing in charcoal on her bedroom wall of a spiral inside, a body inside a church, inside a throat, and the words written in her blood, not by her hand, but by something smaller, help him wake. The mayor hanged himself inside the courthouse with a rope made from choir robes. Tied into knots, only the children could undo. His eyes were missing, not gouged, not stolen, just gone as if they had never existed, and the walls around him bore no sign of struggle, only moisture, only whispers recorded on the office phone for 6 hours of silence, and then, at the end, a child's voice asking, "Is it morning yet?" The field grew taller, not just with grass, but with bones shaped like roots, curling outward from the center of the sinkhole, bleached smooth and warm to the touch, even at night. And when the wind blew, it did not whistle. It spoke, it asked questions. Like, "Do you remember me? And what was your name before? and who carved the door into your ribs? No one could answer. A letter was found buried behind the library, written in ink, made of soot and oil, unsigned but dated. 1852. It warned of the communion of flesh. It described the pact made by the founders. It spoke of children buried not by accident, but by design, their blood mixed into the mortar of every building, their teeth ground into chalk for the school, their hair sewn into the pastor's robe. It said the town would thrive as long as it forgot, but should one remember, all would return. All would open, all would hunger. And the twins remembered, and the field remembered, and the town began to forget what it had ever been. And the church grew taller, not in stone, but in shadow. And the people stopped asking, because answers were now written in their skin. And their skin no longer belonged to them. And still the soil pulsed and whispered and waited, because the doctrine had only just begun. When the census man arrived, he never stepped out of the car. He stared at the houses. Through fogged glass, took one photograph of the church from 100 feet away, and then turned around and drove back to the county office, where he locked himself in the records room and tore every page related to Pine Hollow into long strips, which he then swallowed one by one until he bled from the throat, and whispered, "I took their names, and they took my mouth." The county sent no one else. The town postman left his sack on the school steps, walked into the sinkhole, and disappeared without sound or splash, his letters scattered in the wind, covered in charcoal fingerprints, and a strange scent like spoiled milk and wet earth some of. The letters had no addresses, just names, just dates, just single words like remember or feed or wake. The children were now never seen during the day, and always at night their eyes glowed not red, not white, but green like moss in moonlight. They walked in lines with their hands joined. They stopped before homes and stood for hours without blinking, then turned and walked away without reason or signal. Inside the school, the blackboards erased themselves. No matter what was written, chalk shattered. Mid-word desks tilted toward the center of the room. As if drawn by weight or breath, the principal was found standing in the corner for 3 days. His skin gray, his nails torn off, he spoke only in a hoarse whisper, repeating a prayer not found in any book. Deliver us unto him whose name was first spoken, not aloud, but through hunger. A storm came that lasted 5 minutes, and during it no rain fell, only dust that stained the skin like bruises, only lightning without. Thunder, only wind that screamed, in children's voices, repeating the names of those long dead names not recorded. Names, buried names, and afterward the soil in every yard became soft and warm and breathing. When Clara's mother dug in her garden, she found dolls made of bone and twine, all of them with her daughter's face carved into the skulls. When she tried to burn them, they screamed in her voice. When she buried them, they moved when she left. Them alone they multiplied. A preacher from New Haven arrived, wearing a cross that glowed in the dark, and a belt made of braided crucifix chains. He lasted 3 nights. On the 4th, they found him bound in vines upside down over the pulpit mouth, sewn shut with pages from his own Bible, and around his body, written in black sap, where the words do not unbury what chose to be forgotten. Each morning the sun rose later, not in minutes, but in feeling. The light was slower, weaker. It did not warm, it did not spread. People said they saw 2 suns, one real, and one cracked. The cracked one bled, the cracked one blinked, and when it blinked, everyone forgot what they were doing for 3 full seconds, and some never remembered at all. The well behind the church overflowed with salt, not water, not blood, just salt, thick, coarse, bitter, and inside it the shape of a man suspended upside down, his eyes open, his mouth split down the center, and inside his mouth the faces of the twins, smiling and older and watching and breathing. Children now spoke only to each other in sounds no adult could understand, not quite words, not quite songs. They hummed, they clicked, they wept without tears, and drew symbols into the dirt that glowed at night, and called animals from the woods. Animals with too many legs. Animals that stood upright. Animals that knew their names. One night all clocks stopped not. Just in homes, but on wrists and walls and towers, stopped at the same. Time 3:17 a.m. And at that exact moment, every child in town opened their eyes at once and said the same sentence, "I know where he sleeps." But no one asked who, because they already knew. The Reverend's journal was now missing again, and in its place, a book with no title written in what looked like veins stitched together into words. It described not history, but prophecy. It listed names not of townspeople, but of organs of bones. Of unseen limbs, it described a ceremony without. Participants a ritual performed by the soil itself, a rebirth that required only memory and guilt and teeth. The roots had grown into houses. They burst from floorboards, climbed walls, wrapped around doorframes, but did not strangle. They listened, they watched, they waited, and if you cut them, they bled, and if you burned them, they whispered your name for. 3 nights until you couldn't sleep, and if you ignored them, they grew into your bed and sang while you dreamed. People began digging not for treasure, not for answers, but because something called them to the earth, and those who dug deepest did not return except in fragments. Bones, clean tongues, gone clothes folded and placed neatly at the edge of the hole, as if whoever took them respected their privacy. The sheriff shot himself after carving a spiral into his chest with a spoon. He wrote one word on the wall behind him, not in blood, but in mold: Grace. No one said his name again. The church bell rang on its own 7 times, and on the 7th ring. Every mirror in town cracked down the center, not shattered, not broken, but cracked, and within the crack, a thin layer of darkness pulsed like a heartbeat, and those who looked into it too long said they saw a door with no frame, a door made of mouths, and the mouths were all praying. The hospital closed after all the nurses disappeared in one night, their shoes left in a ring outside the building, and in each shoe a single tooth not human, not animal, long, hollow, warm. The twins were now seen in reflections, not in person, never. In person, only in windows, only in mirrors, only in water, and always. Standing still, always holding hands, always smiling, never blinking. And when you looked away, the air behind you grew heavy, and the wind said your name in their voice. And when you said their names aloud, the sky flickered, and the birds screamed, and the dirt shifted beneath your feet as if preparing to open. No more letters arrived, no more visitors came, no one left. The mayor's office grew cold even in summer, and the walls dripped not water but sap, and when someone tried to paint over the stains, they found the names beneath the paint scratched. Into wood names of children who never lived, names of children not yet born. The field now pulsed at night like a sleeping heart, and at its center the sinkhole was gone, replaced by a mound covered in white roots, and the roots hummed, and the hum sounded like breathing, and sometimes, if you got too close, you heard something from beneath the mound knocking. 3 times, always 3, then silence, and then the smell of milk and meat and salt, then nothing, until you dreamed. And in the dream you saw the first man, the buried man, the waking man, the hungry man, and he opened his eyes, and his eyes were your eyes, and your mouth was his, and your name was gone, and something else spoke in its place, and it said, "Now you remember." The first to go silent was Clara. She did not cry. She did not resist. She simply stopped making sound. Her mouth still moved her. Breath still fogged glass, but her voice was gone, and not just stolen, but erased. She could not scream, not even in dreams, and when her mother held her and begged her to speak, the girl raised her hand and pointed to her throat, where black veins now traced the shape of a key. Others followed. James lost his shadow. It detached one night and stood in the corner of the room. Watching him sleep the next morning, it was gone. And James was different. He laughed when there was no joke. He clapped when nothing happened. he began, drawing symbols in the condensation on windows, and one by one every pet in his neighborhood disappeared, except for their collars, which were left in a circle around his bed. Mothers no longer trusted their children. Some locked their doors at night from the inside. Others fled, leaving behind notes that read, "I tried, I'm sorry, or I still love them, just not." When they smile like that, and the children watch the cars drive away without tears, without questions, without movement, just the same expression, one of patience and knowing and hunger. In the clinic, every medical file grew blank overnight, every drawer filled with teeth, every chart rewritten in a script that looped and spiraled and moved when you stared too long. The doctor who stayed behind reported that the X-ray machine showed not bones but roots, and not lungs but nests, and the eyes in the scans looked back and blinked. He set the building on fire. The fire burned blue and did not go out. They say the teacher, Mrs. Halley, found a cure, but never told anyone instead. She built a garden behind the school with fences, made of rulers and scarecrows stuffed with report cards. Each plant in the garden grew children's names instead of fruit, and when someone picked one, the name vanished from the records, and no one remembered that child ever existed. Even their faces faded from photographs. Even the air felt lighter. Afterward, she was hanged by her own vines. They found her smiling, with her eyes open. Some began praying not to God, but to the twins, not out of devotion, but out of necessity. They built a shrine in the forest with bones and broken toys with pages from the Reverend's journal and mud soaked in blood. They whispered their wishes into dolls, sewn shut, and buried them in the roots, but the roots did not take them instead. They spat the dolls back out with new faces and new mouths sewn open. A man named David tried to map the dreams he had each night. He woke gasping, covered in salt and ash, his arms marked with scratches and threes. He drew what he saw: fields that bent inward, buildings upside down, a sky filled with hands, not stars, and beneath it all a house with no windows, no doors, no roof, just walls breathing in and out, as if alive, as if waiting. On the day he finished the map, he folded it and burned it and whispered thank you, then walked into the woods and was never seen again. His house remained locked from the inside, and yet footsteps in the dust each morning. Children gathered. Now, without being called, they met in the field just before dusk, stood in rows, and stared at the mound. None spoke. None touched, none moved except their eyes, which all blinked in unison every 12 seconds, and those who counted said the number. Never changed, and when someone tried to interrupt them, the birds fell from the sky dead mid-flight, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like crying from under the dirt. The cemetery gates rusted shut overnight, and the graves began to change name stones, smooth themselves, then rewrote words in a new tone, with lines that curled like branches and dots that blinked, and when read aloud caused nausea and nosebleeds and silence. A nurse confessed to stealing the Reverend's book. She said it told her how to stop the sickness, but only if she performed something called. Returning, she gathered 11 infants from surrounding towns and led them into the forest where the trees formed an arch and the ground smelled of metal and milk. She returned alone days later, wrapped in bark, unable to blink or speak, her mouth glued shut with sap and her eyes replaced with glass. Still, she smiled. The town's oldest resident said he remembered the first time the twins arrived, but no one believed him, because he had no teeth, no eyes, and spoke only by writing on the walls in charcoal. And the words he wrote were the same as those found beneath the well, same pattern, same spacing, same warnings, and when asked what they meant, he wrote 2 words over and over: wake him. Then he bit off his tongue and laughed until he bled. Phones stopped working, not in the usual way. No disconnection, no static. Instead, every line rang at 3:17 a.m. And when answered, a recording played of a woman saying, "Your child is ready," then silence. Then breathing, then shooing, then the call ended, and if you called back your number vanished from all records, as if you never had a phone, as if you never existed. And still the twins were never seen directly, only in puddles, in mirrors, in window reflections, and now even in dreams, where they walked backward through fire and water, and each time they spoke, the dreamer woke with a taste of earth in their mouth, and fingers stained with ink they never touched. Some began carving the twins' names into their skin, not to worship, but to forget. They said the pain kept the dreams away. They said the names burned when written, and the heat gave them peace. One woman etched the names into her child's back. The next morning the child was gone, and in their place was a small pile of sand and teeth, and a note that read, "We accept." The mayor vanished. His office locked from within his chair, spinning slowly, and all over the walls the word grace, written in every language known and some unknown, and in the center of the desk a mirror that reflected not the room but the mound. In the field and in the mirror the twins stood closer each day until they touched the glass. And then the mirror cracked, and the office smelled like milk, and behind the walls something knocked, once, then again. Then a voice whispered, "Soon." And that night everyone dreamed the same dream, of the house with no roof, of the floor that breathed, of a crib made of teeth, of a lullaby sung in reverse, of their own name written in roots, of the twins, of the cure, and what must be done to earn it. And in the morning no one spoke. No one cried. They simply walked toward the mound, one by one, barefoot, eyes open, hearts silent, as if pulled, as if chosen, as if remembering something they never learned. But I always knew. The sun never rose that morning. The sky remained a flat gray with no movement, no light, only the sound of distant crows circling. Something that was no longer there. The mound was gone. The children were gone. The field was flat, as if it had never held anything at all. No grass, no stones, no trace of the path they had walked not. Even footprints, only a faint warmth in the soil. Like breath. The town was still, but not empty doors. Hung open kettles boiled over radios. Whispered static in voices that changed accents. Mid-sentence lights flickered in homes with no power. No one spoke. No one called. Each house stood like a tomb not broken, not decayed, just waiting with a silence so thick you could hear your own eyes blink. Thomas the janitor was the only one left, the last known adult, who had not walked into the woods, who had not screamed in their sleep, who had not written on their skin or whispered to broken dolls. He swept the school halls every morning like always, his shoes tapping in rhythm, his face unreadable, his broom worn smooth from the same motion day after day, night after night. Until the morning he found the locker open, locker 44, the one that had always been locked, the one no key, ever fit no student ever claimed, and inside was not a coat, not a book, but a wooden mask, with 2 holes for eyes, and 1 long slit for a mouth. And when he touched it, the hall grew cold, and the clock stopped, and he remembered. He remembered the day the Reverend gave the first sermon, the empty baby carriage, the silence that followed, and the way the earth seemed to hum under his feet for weeks afterward. He remembered the blood under the floorboards in the chapel, the smell of something sweet and sour mixed together, the names written under the pews, the fire that never spread beyond the altar, and the 2 small shoes found in the ash. He remembered the doctor who laughed when he saw the scans, not from madness, but from recognition. He said it was beautiful. He said we were meant to change. He said we were wrong to resist, and then he cut his own face open and tried to wear it backward, like a mask saying, "Now they'll understand now. I see like they do." He remembered the scream from the well, not a child's, not a woman's, but something between, something older, wetter, deeper. It came. Every night at the same time, 2:13 a.m. followed, by a lullaby in a language, No one spoke, and the smell of milk and rust rising from the drain. He remembered the children lined up in the cafeteria, with hands folded and eyes closed, humming in unison. A single note that vibrated through the tiles and caused the lights to flicker, and when the principal tried to interrupt, he vomited black feathers and forgot his own name. He remembered walking into the forest, once just past the school grounds, where the air felt thick and the trees leaned in, and he saw not the twins, but their shadows long and bent across the grass, even though the sun was gone and the wind whispered not warnings but instructions. He remembered the first child who disappeared, not abducted, not stolen, just faded during recess. One blink there, one blink gone, and her name scratched itself off every attendance sheet as if ashamed to remain. He remembered finding the reverend's last note buried in the crawl space of the church, written in charcoal across an animal hide, that read, "He is not a god. He is a return," and then the hide curled and bled and crumbled into salt. And then he remembered the dream. He had it once, just once, but it never left the house-breathing walls, a nursery of teeth roots, crawling across the floor, a crib rocking by itself, and something above the ceiling, not walking, but dragging as if its limbs had never learned to bend, and a voice from under the floor saying it's not about them, it's about what they left behind. Then he opened his eyes and saw that every mirror in the school now showed the same room, even the broken ones, even the ones painted over, and in the room was a chair, and in the chair was a child with no mouth, and in the child's hands was a photo of Thomas as a boy, and behind the boy stood the twins with their hands on his shoulders. And then he remembered their names, and why he had forgotten, and what he had agreed to, and the promise he made in the dark, when the fire would not burn, when the milk would not spoil, when the earth opened just wide enough for a secret to crawl in. He left the school and walked past the homes, past the empty playground, past the cemetery, with the stones now sang when touched, past the well, now sealed with iron bars. He walked into the field where the mound once stood. He stood barefoot. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I am ready." And the ground opened, not like a hole, but like a mouth, and the roots took him gently, and the soil closed again. And above, the sky cracked once, just once, and something blinked. From behind it, not light, not darkness, but memory. And silence returned, the kind of silence that waits, the kind that listens, the kind that dreams. And in the basement of the chapel, where no one had stepped in years, a book opened itself. A page turned, and a single word appeared. Again,